Part 3. I will say up front that thievery-oriented playthroughs tend to be my least favorite when it comes to Morrowind, partially because a little bit of thievery is expected in all playthroughs, and a little bit because thievery just doesn't quite work right. Despite that, both my Thieves Guild and my House Hulau characters actually ranked as my more favorite playthroughs that I did for this series. Steals Your Wallet, a Khajiit thief, took his stipend, and figured the only real goal worthy of life was the acquisition of cash money. Up front, Steals Your Wallet is a bit distinguished from the other characters, as a beast race. Or, as we say in 2019, as a furry.
Khajiit better than lizard.
In particular, I find it funny that since all characters start with shoes, and furries can't wear shoes, that Steals Your Wallet came to Vvardenfell with one of his few possessions, being a pair of common shoes he can't wear. This isn't the only limitation placed on furries and scalies, however. Another is the inability to wear closed-masked helmets, due to the structural limitations of the Khajiit and Argonian faces. Perhaps a note on beast races is the fact that Vvardenfell has institutional slavery. Although outlawed in the Empire, Vvardenfell and the broader province of Morrowind were never actually conquered by Tiber Septim, instead signing an armistice. A great many things were holdover of the pre-Empire Morrowind as a consequence. One of these was slavery. Now, while technically any race can be enslaved, including native Dunmer, the ones you'll generally see being used for slave labor are the two beast races. I should note that it is impossible to be enslaved, unless you spend time in an Imperial Corrections and Rehabilitation Center. There is an abolitionist questline, and you are able to free most slaves you encounter. While there are sometimes different quest paths based on your character's gender, it does not seem to matter much your character's race. You can join and become a leader in most xenophobic factions as an Argonian. Steals Your Wallet, true to his name, enlisted with the Thieves Guild. Now, while other later games would establish the Thieves Guild as an ancient establishment, Vvardenfell is quite different. As I said earlier, Morrowind was not conquered, and so the Imperial Thieves Guild has only recently entered the scene on Vvardenfell. Now, what is the function of a Thieves Guild in Imperial society? After all, what government could support the existence of a faction devoted to crime? Well, generally the Thieves Guild operates within certain rule sets to only really bother those with excess, not the broader public. They serve as a watchdog against other, less nuanced criminal organizations, and of course, they pass on profits to Imperial authorities in the form of bribe money. Vvardenfell's local criminal organization is the Kamana Tong. I've heard them described as a mafia-esque organization. I would say the Kamana Tong is closer to a cartel. Mafias tend to operate on crimes like protection rackets, extortion, and blackmail, like the Thieves Guild, whereas cartels operate on smuggling, corruption, monopoly, and robbery. The Tong is also politically motivated against Outlanders and the Empire, and curiously enough, forms the backbone of the Imperial-aligned House Hulau. So while the early quests of the Thieves Guild will have you performing general contract crime, later quests typically involve taking steps to protect the guild from the Kamana Tong and uncover intrigue that can be used against them. Crime in the Elder Scrolls has largely been unchanged since Morrowind, probably the greatest of later games' changes being that each county would have its own bounty and witnesses could be bribed or killed. The first of crimes is theft.
What are you doing?
The value of your bounty being established by the value of the item stolen. So for example, an early game quest involves stealing a Redoran Master Helmet from Minor Erebar of House Redoran. A Redoran Master Helmet is worth 3,000 gold. If I were to walk up and take the helmet, I would receive a 3,000 gold bounty.
Another pointy-eared king of...
It is worth noting that murder is a 1,000 gold bounty, meaning that I am now as wanted as a serial killer, with just one crime. It is actually considered less of a crime for me to murder Minor Erebar and his guard and just take the helmet with 0 witnesses than it is to just grab the helmet and run away. Theft translating value into the bounty isn't always consistent, however. At one point I stole a soul gem worth over 50,000 gold, but did not get a 50,000 gold bounty. That crime spree did end up at a 19,000 gold bounty overall after looting an enchanted merchant and an alchemy merchant of all their valuables. So how does one get rid of a bounty? The obvious way is to just pay it off. Turning yourself in can even get you a lessened price, usually around 10% off, and worth noting, as a guard is charging to arrest you, it is possible to spam the dialogue prompt and have it count as turning yourself in. However, you aren't often able to sell items for their full value, so if you steal a 100 gold item, you get paid 50 gold for it, and then have to pay off a 90 gold bounty, you have clearly lost money. One perk of the Thieves Guild are certain NPCs who can make bounties go away, at a cost of half the value of the bounty. Constantly resolving bounties this way does eat into your profits quite heavily, so it is better to steal stuff and not be detected. I simply say all this as a way of assuaging the idea that you need to constantly save scum and avoid bounties at all costs, like the later games. In part, this is because every guard in 5 miles will not attempt to arrest you for bounties under 1,000 gold.
Stop!
For some other crimes, there's trespassing, which is actually not trespassing like the other games, but just trying to break into an area. As long as you aren't caught breaking in, you're free to hang out in people's houses.
I would like to add in editing that since interior NPCs generally don't move around as a rule, shopkeepers who have merchandise around a corner will often have a guard in their shop watching said merchandise. This was a quirk notable of Balmora, Pelagiad, and Caldera. I don't recall many instances outside of those areas using this technique to detect crime. Other shopkeepers would just keep all their merchandise in view of them. The problem with this, which gets into the early game exposure to crime, is that you have an immediate response if you try to steal from these shops, and I don't really think the town would appreciate one of its merchants getting a full-time town guard dedicated to preventing theft because the merchant was too lazy to watch their stuff.
Sleeping in an owned bed is a fun one, especially when you do it accidentally trying to pick up something off the bed.
Stop! You violated the law.
Pickpocketing has a lot of nuance in how it gets counted as a crime, but do not worry because Steals Your Wallet will never successfully pick a pocket in his entire career. And neither will you. Because of a mistake in the code, the skill checks for pickpocket are so punishing that there is only a 56% chance maximum of successfully picking a pocket, and that is only when you're at a high skill level. Value plays a heavy factor as well, so certain gold values are impossible to pickpocket. Pickpockets never really worked in Elder Scrolls. In reality, it's generally seen as a low-level crime, but is so reliably caught at low levels in game that I would think most people would just avoid pickpocketing entirely, beyond the odd gimmick here or there like reverse pickpocketing. So while Oblivion onwards would fix the odds of a pickpocket, they also made the penalties for pickpockets so high in the form of hyperactive guards as to make the venture completely unworthwhile for low-level criminals, but worth a laugh for high-level ones, which is just bass-ackwards. I'll get into the other two crimes of assault and murder later. For now, let's talk about some Thieves Guild quests. Balmora is the logical place for most players to embark on their careers in the Imperial guilds, being the first town they're sent to after all. The player is even directed to ask at the corner club the Thieves Guild hides in for directions to Kasadi's house. The first 3 quests of the Balmora Thieves Guild rather elegantly display some of Morrowind's problems with thievery, however, and very quickly, I might add. The first quest of the Balmora Thieves Guild is to steal a diamond from Naucaria of Whitehaven, the local alchemist who is quite wealthy. As the first quest of the Thieves Guild, this is quite a challenging proposition for new players, as the diamonds in question are directly in front of her. Now, some people are going to say some usual arguments for how these quests should be done, generally involving magic. I ask you then how new players to Morrowind fresh off the boat are supposed to figure these things out for this quest. The reality is that this quest is a trap, and teaches important lessons that work for the rest of the game. The first lesson is that quest givers generally do not care that you specifically give them what they ask for. A diamond is still a diamond to Habasi, she does not need a specific diamond. And the second lesson is that purchasing a diamond from Naucaria is a perfectly acceptable solution for the quest. Worth noting, and this is something I'm learning as of now, there are diamonds upstairs above her bed in a locked chest. This information is not relayed to the player, and while it is my fault for not exploring, plenty of people have fallen for the trap that is this quest. Me personally, I just purchased them while selling contraband I stole from the Mages Guild, so I made a profit anyways. The second quest of the Balmora Thieves Guild is to acquire a key to Nerano Manor. There are 2 keys in question, one on the manor's owner Andres Nerano, and one on his manservant, Silvor Trandel. Either can be pickpocketed, if such a thing is possible. I actually saved scum for about 15 minutes just to see if it was, and not once did I actually succeed in stealing the key off of either man. Both can be killed for the key. While there is no extra consequence for killing the manservant, killing the owner does have some consequence, since it's hard to get use out of a key when the owner is no longer alive. However, legally killing Sovor is difficult because generally the only option available to players is going to be taunts, which at this level take an exceptional amount of time to actually work. You can also convince Sovor into giving you the key, either with admiration or with bribes, but again, since the player is new, admiration may not work, and bribes may quickly surpass the rewards of the quest. The third quest of Balmora's Thieves Guild is to acquire Dwemer artifacts off another Khajiit, Razid. Razid cannot be convinced, and his tricky position makes cleanly stealing the artifacts in question a difficult proposition. In attempting to do so, I earn a bounty for defending myself from Razid. These three quests expose a massive fault in the thievery playstyle, that being the extreme difficulty of leveling thief skills naturally. Sneak only levels when you sneak around NPCs who can detect you. Since you aren't going to often be doing this, because trespassing of the later games hasn't been implemented yet, and there is no need to sneak around non-hostile NPCs, I never once saw Sneak level up outside of trainers. Sneak can be leveled relatively quickly by successful pickpockets, but again, such things may not be possible in mortal lifetimes, since you can get 1/50th of a level for every successful pickpocket. And you can't level Sneak on enemies very well because the second they detect you, you aren't going to lose them. Leveling Speechcraft organically will typically involve ruining dispositions with a lot of people, or spending a lot on bribe money. Illusion magic can be a solution for hybrid classes provided you cast the magic in question quite a bit. Using trainers is an option, but I should stress these are the newbie quests, they don't pay particularly well, and getting these skills high enough to be functional is more costly than the rewards given by the quests. Thus I view the early game Thieves Guild quests as likely the worst aspect of the guild. It does get better, much better in fact, but this early part is very weak, which is a surprise given the extra effort the Thieves Guild seemed to receive compared to some of the other factions. So what can be done? Unlike the later games, there isn't one path to completion in the guild. If you find yourself unable to complete a quest, you could always find a new job in a different guild hall. The Aldrune Hall is about as forgiving. It starts out innocuous, the local Mages Guild is out on a Vegas trip and is apparently empty. We need to grab an enchanted Tonto, and while we're there, we can help ourselves to anything we find. Only the guild hall isn't empty, someone was left behind, and he immediately assumes we're a thief. Unlike later installments of the guild, there is actually not much of a penalty for killing people while on the job, with exceptions where killing someone might complicate future work, like with Andres Nerano. This is because the Thieves Guild understands that sometimes, in a B&E, things happen, and the job still needs to get done. They prefer murder not be the first solution that members think of, but more of a reactionary measure taken. Unlike a later guild, who had exclaimed that they don't allow killing because they aren't the Dark Brotherhood.
Second, never kill anyone on the job. This is not the Dark Brotherhood. There's something not right about you. Maybe you should go.
Security is another thief skill, but it does not suffer the issues the other skills have. You only need a security level of 40 out of 100 to unlock any chest in the game, provided you have a master pick. Anything beyond that just means you open stuff in less attempts. Of course, lock level 100 is fairly uncommon, with the average lock being closer to around lock level 50. So this ended up being the only quest where I ran into the lock too complex message, since I quickly got my hands on some master picks and outleveled all the locks. I suppose I should mention the lockpick levels. They follow the levels of Apprentice, Journeyman, Master, and Grandmaster. Grandmasters are uncommon, so I'd use them for the special occasions. Lockpick quality translates to effectiveness, another factor in the equation that is lockpicking that was cut from the later games in favor of a more universal pick. Lockpicking is not done through a minigame, but rather by clicking on the lock while holding the pick in your hand. So it's done in real time, which means should you lack the skill in lockpicking and consistently fail, it means you have to take into consideration guard patrols and the like. This is another way that skill levels differentiate the masters from the apprentices. There are also traps, but they all have a standard level, so any probe in the game can break them. Magical classes can, of course, use alterations to unlock chests. For the spell Open, its level directly translates to what it opens, so an undecized spell will open all locks up to level 50. This may seem more effective provided you have the magicka and aptitude to cast such spells. Traps can be bypassed with magic provided you know the spell Telekinesis, since activating the trap from a distance will cause it to miss. Traps can range in effectiveness. Sometimes they instantly kill you, sometimes they just cast a low-level burden effect. There's really no telling from the outside what any one trap is going to do. In fact, I don't even think that they're consistent. As for fighting classes, your best bet is to use a Scroll of Open, of which there are two types, Undecide's Unhinging and E-Cash's Lock Splitting. They carry the upsides of magic, with the downsides of weight and monetary cost. If there is a level 75 lock, you'll have to use your expensive E-Cache's lock splitter to open it. I think a particular failure of the game is the inability of fighting classes to open a lock without a magical or thief-related ability. This creates a lot of situations for role-playing characters who avoid sneaky measures from opening certain chests, as there's not always a key. Those born under the sign of the tower can use a daily ability to open a level 50 lock, which is ironically more useful to fighting classes than it is to thief or mage classes, since it's ridiculously easy for both to have the necessary skill level and toolset to unlock a level 50 lock. It also comes with Detect Key and Enchantment, which are the saddest spells ever, since the quest and level designers never created any situations where you would need those effects. Back on the topic of the Thieves Guild, our next quest is to steal that Redoran Master Helmet I mentioned earlier. Erebar's guard can occasionally path out of the room if you leave the door open, then you can shut the door on her to keep her out.
What? You must be joking.
Now you're down to Erebar, but he's a bit politically significant to just kill. Luckily, NPCs can be distracted. By getting NPCs to speak towards you, you can control the direction they look. This isn't always reliable, since sometimes NPCs are positioned up against a wall, but here it is necessary. For our next job, we're then tasked with stealing a smut book from Minor Erebar's daughter, and...
Oh my god, this is absolutely depraved! I love it!
Now, somebody has a grudge against Erebar, and it's strange because this plot point doesn't come up again, not even in the House Redoran questline. Over in Sadrith Mora, we get a job to steal a potion recipe for the benefit of the local Mages Guild. We can, of course, ask for the recipe, to which we'll be told,
No, I don't think so.
Naturally, she forgets we asked after we take it. Or maybe we make a copy. Either way, this quest is actually really easy. So, naturally, the next one is quite difficult. We are to steal a rare Grandmaster's retort from a trader in Tel Mora. This is difficult as the retort is in clear view of the merchant. She's willing to sell it, but isn't in a selling mood until somebody deals with the health and safety violation upstairs that is a corpus monster. The zombie has a good deal of health, but is trapped behind some clutter, so we can pick it off from a distance safely. There are other retorts, and they are about as difficult to acquire as this one. The wiki actually suggests you kill Berlin, which is pretty psychopathic. But he's a bit politically significant to just kill. I just buy it off her and trade some contraband I'd stolen earlier to make up the capital. It's better for everyone that way. Our next task is to help improve the defenses of the guild hall by hiring a battle mage. We ask around the local mages guild and come to a deal. 4 pieces of ebony for a battle mage. Ebony is a controlled substance in the Empire, which naturally poses some challenges in acquiring it. At this point, we're getting the beginnings of a clue that this is more than just go to X place and steal Y thing. If we go to the big city, Vivec, you'll find people a lot less knowledgeable about where the Thieves Guild is. In the East Canal Works, below the Waste Works, of the foreign quarter of Vivec is a bookshop belonging to Simon Fralinet. Behind a locked door inside his shop are the headquarters of the Thieves Guild. I feel no shame in marking this position as to avoid trying to find it every time. Jim has 2 quest lines, a final one for the Thieves Guild, and one for those who've messed up the earlier quests and need the reputation. We'll start with that one, the Bal Molagmer. So, in Dunmer culture there was a group called the Bal Molagmer who would steal from the unjust and give to the needy. Stunningly clever and original, I know. This faction exists, like I said, for rep points, but also for that group of people who can only allow themselves to be criminals if they're doing it for what they perceive to be justifiable reasons. There is no reward for these quests. There isn't even really the opportunity to steal valuables while doing these quests, and there is no ceremony at the end. Merely acknowledgement that you're now qualified to do good on your own. Still, the questline is enjoyable. Most of them start with Stacy explaining an injustice that has occurred or is in the process of occurring, and the steps we can take to correct it. Also necessary is wearing a pair of gloves that are iconic to the group, and signifying in conversation that we are acting on behalf of the Bal Molagmer. At first, nobody cares, but as the deeds go on, people start to recognize the name and the actions. You can catch Halau Counselor Yingling Half-Troll in an act of corruption, accuse him, and then kill him in self-defense. Or it can be as simple as stealing a locket and returning it to its owner. Perhaps the most interesting about the questline is the thought process of whether or not Jim Stacy is having you do this out of genuine interest in restoring the Bal Molagmer, or simply as a ploy to generate goodwill with the people of Vardenfell. It's a theme that's reflected in the main storyline as well. So let's get into the endgame of the Thieves Guild questline. This starts with the process of building up the guild. In Balmora, we free a member from prison by tricking a guard into self-admitting that she was taking bribes. Then we find a master of security hiding in Balmora and convince him to step up and help secure the corner club. After this quest, Habasi will perform a free wipe of your bounty, which served as a fantastic opportunity to rob everyone blind and get away with it for free. 19,000 gold bounty, gone. In Aldrune, we collect the scrap metal to build a spider centurion, and collect the darts of judgment from a Redoran guard. The dark quest is interesting because the amount of rep and pay you get depends on how many you return. They aren't really worth keeping though, so it isn't really a choice. Now let's talk about Marksman. Steals your wallet, preferred ranged combat, but also kept short-bladed weapons as backups. Marksman is a mostly simple affair. You take a bow, arrows, and shoot people. Projectiles generally travel in a straight line, and your chance of hitting is pretty much guaranteed at a marksman level greater than 50. Vardenfell, however, sees wood at a premium, and so favor bows made of chitin and laminated in resin, or bows made of steel. This is to say that the selection is rather weak, basically jumping from bone mold to Daedric. Some nuance does come with the arrow selection, however, and arrows do have travel time, and enemy marksmen are actually really easy to dodge since they are easily tricked into leading their shots. Crossbows are another option. The steel crossbow is the mass-produced Imperial Legion version, and there is a Dwemer version as well. I always found it strange that the Empire just forgot about crossbows in Oblivion, and then they were rediscovered in Skyrim. Then again, they never managed to rediscover the spear, you know, one of the most basic weapons in human history. There are also throwing weapons, but sadly they are underappreciated. It's hard to appreciate a weapon that disappears after you use it, especially when said weapon is one of the only ones that exists in the game. Using the Darts of Judgment isn't a wise move because you can't retrieve them if you miss, and have a very low chance if they hit, and even if you do hit, they don't do standout damage. As for lesser throwing weapons, a stable supply of anything greater than steel was pretty unreliable. They're actually kind of fun since they massively scale with your strength, but have way too many downsides to consistently use. Hey, this is me in post. I just want to add one of the reasons throwing weapons are so much fun in Morrowind is because of their slow travel time and high damage on impact, so you feel like a ninja when you throw one and strafe to a side, watching as the projectile you threw connects with the target. For the love of God, please bring back the throwing weapons. I get the battle mage hired, and am tasked with stealing a Redoran cookbook. An odd-sounding quest, I know. I feel as though the Sadrith Mora quests were a bit out of order. The final Sadrith Mora quest is to steal an ebony staff from Felin Marion, a Telvanni wizard living in Tel Brenora. She's more so giving the job to satisfy a personal grudge, and doesn't really care if we decline it or accept it. It's actually pretty easy, I just get behind the shelf and grab it. This quest has two big rewards, a telekinesis ring and another bounty reset. Telekinesis allows you to interact with objects at a distance, which includes picking locks and stealing objects. I think they intended the final quest of each hall to reward something useful. The location of a master trainer in Balmora, a quote-unquote powerful ranged weapon in Aldrune, and the TK ring in Sadrith Mora, as well as bounty resets at the end of each line. The problem is that these are, for the most part, not that useful as rewards. The Master Trainer might let us raise a skill up easily, but said skill is security, the one that does not need to be as high. The darts are better off being turned in for gold, and the telekinesis ring, while useful, is coming far too late in the quest line, given how the following quests play out. The bounty resets are nice, but are also not telegraphed to the player when you'll get them, meaning it's entirely probable players never actually get to use them the way I did. This leads us into the final chain of events. Have you wondered why all the masters took steps to shore up the defenses of the guild halls? Well, it's because it's known to the members of the guild that the Fighters Guild head, Shoring Hardheart, is working in service of the Kamana Tong, and is making moves against the Thieves Guild. Jim Stacy starts us down the path of retribution with an investigation into the disappearance of a guild member. Turns out Nads Theron is in his studio apartment, dead. A short, optional investigation reveals the murderer to be a barmate over at the Elven Nation's Corner Club, Arvama Rothri, who happens to be a Halahu retainer. Accuse her, and she'll admit it. And she'll also admit that she's going to try to kill you. We return to Stacy, and we get a bonus for taking out Rothri. Our next objective is to speak with Perseus Mercius of the Aldrune Fighters Guild. He was the old guildmaster before Joring, and is more principled. If you have a decent disposition with him, he'll even give you some information. He was the master of the Fighters Guild before the Kamana Tong made a move. Harundi was the second in command and is against the Tong, but might not help out the gate unless we leverage a love affair he's involved in. Idis Fireeye at the Balmora Fighters Guild is a competent fighter, but she's a worshipper of Clavicus Vile and impossible to blackmail. Shoring Hardheart is in great debt to the Kamana Tong and will likely have to be killed. If you've never played an Elder Scrolls game before, I envy you, but I should also explain that the Fighters Guild, like the Thieves Guild, is an Imperial organization that does as its namesake implies. It is a joinable faction, and is in the next section of this video. So having a questline where you murder their entire upper management is, to players of the later games, a highly unusual affair. Imagine a quest where the companions are ordered to take out the College of Winterhold, for example. To take care of Idis, we have to get our hands on a Clavicus Vial artifact, the Bitter Cup. This provides a non-lethal solution to dealing with Idis at the cost of the Bitter Cup. What does it do? It raises your highest attribute by 20 points and lowers your lowest by 20. Not the most useful thing, but it is necessary if you want to min-max your health. The real value of this quest, however, is... Oh, no, wait, no, hang on, no! Okay, so one naked skeleton war wizard later, and as I was saying, the real value of this quest is something the skeleton is carrying called the Vampiric Ring. It's an enchanted ring that absorbs a massive amount of health and fatigue from enemies on touch. It's quite deadly. Give Idis the cup, and she pledges her allegiance. Jem notes that she'll likely be trouble down the line, but for now she's no longer a problem. Our next step is to convince Harundi over in Sadrith Mora to join us. He can be made amicable to the idea, but can also be convinced if you figure out who he is choreographing an affair with and threaten her life to him. Finally, before we can make our move, we need to take out some top-level enforcers in the Kamana Tong. Yeah, this is a straight-up assassination mission. Vardenfell's Thieves Guild does not fuck around with trying to be the better man.
Second, never kill anyone on the job. This is not the Dark Brotherhood. Animals and monsters can be slain if necessary.
Of course, we aren't going to go out of our way to kill Orvis Drin. He is the Duke's brother after all, but his two goons that pose a threat are free game. The game actually bugs out. One of the brothers is supposed to teleport behind you when you start the fight, but ended up teleporting inside a door. This made killing the first brother easy, but I was somewhat stuck. I could still teleport out with magic, obviously, I just didn't want to. Eventually he got free. This guy's a bastard. He has a Jinx blade that paralyzes for longer than it takes to swing it, so he can basically score a bunch of free hits until the enchantment runs out of a charge. Luckily that new Vampiric Ring is very lethal and restores our health. And finally, for our endgame, we're tasked with taking down Shoring Hardheart. We're warned that he's a competent fighter.
Head on. You will die where you stand.
You are clumsy, snowman.
So what are the conclusions? The Fighters Guild threat against the Thieves Guild have been eliminated. Not entirely sure who's going to run the Fighters Guild now, but at least it's not being run by somebody in debt to the Kamana Tong. The Tong itself has lost its top enforcers, while the guild has built up its defenses and position in Vardenfell, appearing more culturally relevant thanks to their Bal Molagmer revival than the xenophobic Kamana Tong. Stacy figures this is an adequate position to retire in, having found a successor and steals your wallet, and hands us the skeleton keys to the skeleton car. Okay, I'm sorry. The skeleton key works like a normal lockpick, with 50 uses and 5 times the effectiveness. I prefer Morrowind's Thieves Guild line to its other incarnations. It does feel like helping to maintain your criminal family without any metaphysical connotations. I'm not Steel's their wallet, protector of the people and hero of the poor. I'm Steel's your wallet, known criminal overlord. Sadly, this is where the story of Steel's Your Wallet ends. He never achieved his namesake, and there wasn't really anything logical to do with him as a follow-up, like the other characters, which is a shame because I did like him. Apparently not enough to notice that his name was actually Steel's Wallet, however, you can't do dashes on the Morrowind Xbox. Mace was a meme character. His class name of Jedi Knight and his propensity to bash people in the head with the blunt side of his weapon didn't really help much to assuage that fact. I was originally going to call him Metal Bat because he uses a metal bat and has the whole fighting spirit thing going on. How do I get this tangent back on track? The Fighters Guild is a rather straightforward organization. You sign up, you get a contract, you fight, you get paid. What we'll typically be doing is a reflection of the area you're in. I.e. in Balmora, you start off with normal contracts and move on to shadier business. Since we just covered this in the last section, we have to operate with some sense of dramatic irony that says the Fighters Guild isn't corrupt. This does become apparent by our third contract, but I get ahead of myself. Our first job is to take care of some rats. The first one is simple enough, the other two not so much. These rats have a lot more health than your standard large rodent, and 2v1 is a bit of a challenging proposition for early game builds. Luckily, we have racial abilities that generally turn the tide of fights like this. Our next contract is to take care of some Kwama egg poachers.
What?
Okay, so in Morrowind, the main food the Dunmer eat is giant eggs harvested from insects living in caves that are the size of bears.
What?
And when people are desperate, they poach the eggs.
What?
We make our way to the mine, and some of the miners say that the egg poachers are in the back, near the queen, and ask that we try to avoid killing any of the Kwama since they won't be used to our scent and will attack us on sight. I could pontificate about lessons taught in these quests, or we could call them what they are, filler. Now, filler isn't bad, and there could always be more generic but scripted, basic level contracts to do, but I'm not going to pretend it's something greater than it is, when in this case it's not. Our third contract, however, is where things get interesting. Idis tells us to take care of some, quote, Telvanni agents, end quote. Of course, when we ask about these Telvanni agents, it turns out that they aren't Telvanni, they're Thieves Guild. Perhaps working for Telvanni, but all Thieves Guild nonetheless, and one wonders at the need for deception. It is also entirely possible that less attentive players who aren't curious enough to ask about the targets will miss the subtext of this quest entirely. So it is nice that the writing isn't so on the nose as to make absolutely sure we are aware that Idis is deceiving us. You have to actually roleplay as somebody who asks questions to figure out that something is wrong, and if you don't, you get led down the lemming path. I go out and meet the guys, their lookout greeting me friendly enough, but turning hostile when he realizes I'm with the Fighters Guild. I defend myself and figure I might as well finish the job. It ain't nothing a little adrenaline rush can't handle. Idis's next contract is even more sketchy. She wants me to get my hands on a Thieves Guild code book from the local guild hall. I figure I'll look for a different contract and meet Perseus Mercius. He says he doesn't have any contracts for members at my rank, but he does offer advice for jobs and suggests I speak with Harundi over in Sadrith Mora for good ones. He figures the codebook contract might be legitimate, but advises that we avoid a lethal solution. I decide to go to Harundi, and his jobs are a lot better. His first job is to provide support to a witch hunter hunting a Daedroth in Ninchurn Dams. This first entails getting to Ninchurn Dams, which is a remote location that takes a bit of water walking to get to. Although the circumstances of getting to this quest can be difficult, the quest itself is quite good. It's a great introduction to combat, with a necessary crutch for players in the form of Lariana. She's a capable warrior with unique audio dialogue who is able to heal the player if they get wounded and can generally handle the creatures inside Ninchurn Dams. Ninchurn Dams has early access to some Dwemer gear and ends in the mini-boss of Hrelvzu. This is what should have been Morrowind's introduction to the Fighters Guild. Morrowind's combat is very straightforward, but I see a lot of people who pick up this game get overwhelmed and mentally overcomplicate something that can really be as basic as point and click to do damage. The problem boils down to the fact that people will pick a basic class like Knight, then take that dagger in the census office, go off to fight a mud crab, miss, and start immediately complaining that they should have hit the crab because the models collided. Hit chance is a part of Morrowind. Playing Morrowind without hit chance is not playing Morrowind. Weapon skills are a reflection from 0 to 100 of how proficient you are with using said weapon. Believe it or not, but swords aren't as simple as swing sword hurt person. Ideally, if your system is set up right, the footage of someone playing as an unskilled weapon user should differ from the footage of someone playing as a master in that skill, right? Well, here's what an amateur in Morrowind looks like. As you can see, I'm having a hard time landing hits using a weapon I've never used before. And here is what a master looks like. As you can see, I'm landing hits consistently and ending the fight quite quickly. This is a proper contrast between apprentice and master. Let's contrast this now with Oblivion's allegedly revolutionary and entertaining combat system. Clip 1. Alright, and clip 2. Now, tell me, which one was the master clip and which one was the apprentice clip? This is not a trick where I switch the clips or they're both the same skill level. I've kept all the conditions the same. Same enemy, same difficulty. The first clip is skill level 5, the second clip is skill level 100, and yet they are practically identical. Because unlike in Morrowind, there is no progression in field of combat, only in the raw numbers of damage you do. The way skills work in Morrowind is that they determine your chance to hit. Your damage is then affected by the weapon you're using and your strength. In Oblivion and Skyrim, however, all your skill affects is just a damage increase. The first enemy you fight with a weapon, all the way to the last enemy, will be exactly the same because all you have to do is make models intersect. With manual blocks, parries, and more intelligent AI, it can be a more interesting or dynamic melee combat system, but it's not a melee combat system that accurately reflects skill levels with weapons, or a combat system that is reflective of an actual progression of character skill, something that is important in a role-playing game. Because there's one thing I've left out of all of this. The enemy has skills too, because of course they do. NPCs can be more or less dangerous as a result of their own backstory and training. This includes their own chance to hit, as well as various defensive skills that determine your chance to hit them. Perhaps this just comes down to a matter of preference, but rather than tying our preference to nostalgia, let's consider what meaningful difference there is between a hit chance-oriented combat system like Morrowind versus a percentage damage-oriented combat system like Oblivion and Skyrim. In the hit chance system, should you be far superior to an enemy, you're able to kill them quickly and efficiently. There is a clear progression from the first enemy you fight to the last. You're encouraged to specialize and invest in a particular weapon, rather than switching arbitrarily to ones that have bigger numbers than the last. In a percent damage system, you cannot be superior to an enemy, as scaling will eliminate your advantages. Increasing your skill is not a matter of gaining an advantage, but keeping up with the world. Rather than becoming incrementally better at landing hits, you are becoming incrementally better at doing slightly more damage. The skill is less so a reflection of you or other characters' proficiency and mastery, but a stagnating progression where combat is identical for the entire game. All this lost because some people complained they couldn't hit mud crabs with a weapon their character had never picked up before. I hope you can forgive me, but I am going to speed up, particularly as a number of Fighters Guild quests are not noteworthy. These are as simple as go to place, kill, or do thing. One quest type I particularly like is the fact that the guild has been contracted by the Empire to deliver alcohol shipments to miners in remote areas, something that feels like a legitimate contract such an organization would receive. Our next notable mission is to rescue and escort a researcher investigating a Dunmer stronghold, Telecero. I have mixed feelings on escort quests, which is quite a surprise as I, and this is a fairly reasonable position, vehemently dislike them in most contexts. I think Morrowind's escort quests work because they allow you to lead and listen to your commands to stop and let you do your job. They are also fairly rare, and when they do pop up, they are short and designed in such a way to be painless. So it turns out that the researcher, her name is Sondale, went in ahead of us, and this is a 6th house base. What happens at 6th house bases? She's in a side room, hopped up on a table because some giant rats are harassing her. I mean, they're the size of dogs, I'm sure they could get up there. I find the 6th house hammer, which is interesting because its damage can range from a peck one might give a lover to a pair of school buses set in a head-on collision. Sadly, it's also really heavy, so I don't have any room for it in my life. We're then tasked with taking care of a bounty in the local Sadrith Mora. Engare has taken up residence up Entel Naga, particularly as a prisoner of Master Neloth. I have to taunt the guard into attacking me, which is a tall order for my speechcraft level. Neloth then gets rather upset when I kill Engar, perhaps mad I shortened his life as a prisoner, but as per Telvanni law, it's a-okay because I managed to escape the building. Let's take this opportunity to talk about the AI in Morrowind. It's bad. It prioritizes casting worth spells, like Minor Burdens or Blind. It only repositions to avoid damage if using ranged. Then it runs full speed backwards, which makes archers in open environments a nightmare. Melee AI will just book it towards you until death, only running away if you go invisible or start flying out of their reach. AI is an area that the later games improved without question. Hell, as early as Morrowind's first expansion, they had AI who could drink potions, which means that for the entirety of the base game, potions are a distinct advantage held solely by the player. This is one of the reasons I don't like to do everything in one playthrough, because Morrowind reaches a point where the AI stops being a challenge. When you are working within the limitations of the early game, finding creative solutions around problems, that's when Morrowind is interesting. Some of the most fun I've had in Morrowind was during a Mage's Guild quest where I had to kill an enemy who was 10 levels higher than me and could one-shot me. Whereas if the Mage's Guild was just the third faction I joined, I'd already be higher level than the NPC and able to take the hits while killing them in 3, maybe 2 hits. Anyways, Hurundi is out of real contracts, but has one mission that he believes is in all likelihood bullshit. Apparently there are 7 eggs of gold inside a legendary mine, the Pude Egg Mine, somewhere on or around the island of Sheogorad. He's willing to pay quite a bit should the eggs actually exist. So this entails some time exploring Sheogorad, and I took the chance to do some dungeon crawling. I found some Malakath worshippers and got a few full sets of Orcish. I ended up finding an arena being used for slave fighting. They weren't appreciative of me, and so I got a powerful legendary sword. And in one of the earlier quests, I had slain a vampire who was wearing a powerful ring. This is a point in every Morrowind playthrough I call the power threshold. If you have a graph, there's a line for the progression of the difficulty and a line for the progression of the character. The power threshold is when the character line intersects and becomes greater than the difficulty line. Once characters cross the threshold, they've become powerful enough to handle the challenges of the game. It's rewarding and, at the same time, a sad part of Morrowind because it means that the challenge is over. You can turn up the difficulty, but all that does is make enemies hit a little harder and make you a little more fragile. Orcish armor is some of the best medium armor in the game. The sword, the Ice Blade of the Monarch, is extremely powerful, even for a character that is specialized in blunt weaponry. And the ring provides some serious defensive enchantments, reflecting and resisting damage. All turning up the difficulty really does now is push me to use my Adrenaline Rush ability more often. I do eventually find the mine, which, for an abandoned mine, still has lit torches. I mean, okay, I've worked with the editor, you have to place a prop, a light source, and a sound source, so either someone created the mine unaware of what quest it would involve, someone created the mine, was aware of the quest, and didn't see anything wrong with torches in an abandoned mine, or my favorite possibility, someone copied the mine from elsewhere and made the bare essential modifications for the sake of the quest. Down all the way at the back, behind the queen, are the 7 eggs, which all weigh 30 pounds. So getting back is a challenge, but it's a challenge that's met by magic. Hurundi, surprised we even found the cave, pays us 10,000 gold for the job, which is quite a big payout. He is out of work for us and recommends us to Perseus Mercius back in Aldrune. And Perseus does have work for us now. He wants us to help a buoyant armiger take care of a necromancer at Voss. Said necromancer is a member of Telvanni, so one wonders at the political nature of the situation. The armiger is willing to give us a recommendation provided we don't hit her in the fight. I don't, but I do take an accidental swing at her ancestor ghost. Look, I didn't even hit him, it's fine. But it's enough to be a problem and I get paid a lower rate. Our next job is to take care of a bounty of someone living in a place called Sargon. That's the only reason I mention this quest, it's otherwise by the book. We take care of some more bounty, we deliver some more liquor, and then I go ahead and meet the guild leader, Shoring, who gives me 5,000 gold and instructs me to take care of the 3 masters of the Thieves Guild in Bal Molagmer, Aldrune, and Sadrith Mora. Perseus, on the other hand, decides it's time to ask we take care of a few corrupt Fighters Guild members, Idis Fireeye in Bal Molagmer, and Lord Bumal Gro Aglak in Vivek. I go with Perseus, since he's been the more reasonable option. Idis Fireeye attacks me as soon as I enter, and Gro Aglok declares that he'll be guildmaster soon enough. Then, we're tasked by Perseus to take care of Shoring. He gives me access to full sets of Orcish and glass armor, and tells me that Shoring is one of the toughest fighters on the island.
You should have picked an easier opponent.
Shoring is one of the toughest fighters on the island. And he wasn't even wearing his armor. The Fighters Guild fizzles out towards the end. For all the intrigue behind the Thieves Guild relying on the Fighters Guild to be interesting and lasting throughout the entire storyline, it's a shame that there weren't more missions in the Fighters Guild side of the story where you can play the other side. And it's a shame that these quests were so on the nose with it. It's very difficult to see anybody being tricked into going against the Thieves Guild, unless they just aren't paying attention and thinking about what they're doing, or they don't care. Should you side with Thorin and kill the 3 masters, he'll then task you with killing Jim Stacy, before then attempting to kill you, so in the end, all roads lead to Shoring Hardheart's death. I could say that the Fighters Guild has some appeal in that it pays, but it doesn't even pay all that well for the work. You go from running errands and performing contracts to decimating the leadership in one quest. The Shadow War with the Thieves Guild is only hinted at if you decide to play the Stooge, and the Command Tong doesn't even come up from the Fighters Guild perspective. Our Mages Guild character started off by picking everything from Sidonin to Balmora, and once she got her free 200 Gs from Caius, joined up with the Mages Guild. Turns out the early Balmora quests deal with picking mushrooms and flowers that I happened to grab. Who could have seen this coming? Well, me, because I've done this before. Between the collection of mushrooms and flowers, we're tasked with replacing a soul gem with a fake in our boss's rival's desk, slowing her research. She'll come downstairs, and due to her faulty AI, this means I'm free to leave the cell and come back, and that traps her downstairs, forever, which is a more convenient location. I'm not sure about these early quests. They aren't introducing alchemy, asking the player to create a potion with the ingredients or anything like that. It's just go out and fetch some ingredients. As for the Soul Gem quest, it isn't usually the case that static NPCs move around during quests, so that isn't introducing anything new either. You also don't need to use magic. It might have been handy to have a quest involve learning a low-level unlock, like 5 points, to unlock her desk to perform the switch. As it stands, it feels like the designer is showing off that they can script NPCs to move around during quests, which, again, isn't useful information for the player since it doesn't happen again, nor is it impressive from a technical standpoint, since all it does is highlight the fact that NPCs don't work on a schedule and just stay in the same spot all day. It would be like me bragging that I can edit out all these coughs. Our next quest is to take 10 gold and buy a ceramic bowl. This is so that the cell can reset so that when I return, stolen reports will have spawned. We're then tasked by a panicking Ajira to find said reports. This is the closest the game comes to teaching a lesson, and the lesson is just look around the environment and you can find stuff. And that's it for now with Ajira. I know I've been hard on these 5 quests, but that is more from an analytical standpoint than anything else. The Thieves and Fighters Guild have you playing out these fantasies, but the Mages Guild plays more like assistant busy work. We're presented a choice. Work with Rhanis Athras in Balmora, or Edwina Elbert in Aldrune. Rhanis' quests are a bit more oriented towards the guild as a magical regulator, while Edwina's quests are oriented towards the guild as a research institution. Rhanis first asks we take care of a Telvanni in Sulapund, either recruiting him to the Mages Guild or killing him. While we're out here, we're also to collect dues from a member in Punambi. Over in Aldrune, we're tasked with taking 250 gold and finding a copy of the Chronicles of Nushleft. And turns out, in Vivek, the Archmage has duties for us. He wants us to solve the disappearance of the dwarves. No leads or anything, just solve this ancient mystery that people have been investigating for centuries. And also 3 games. The trip out to Sulapund and Punabi is a bit of a drastic shift in difficulty. Ajira was really onto something when recommending us against doing Rhanis' tasks, since we're tasked with journeying into Molag Amur. If only there were quests prior to this that could have prepared us for combat. I get to the first cave, and Manwë, the person who has been dodging their dues, is performing research out here. She owes 2,000 gold in dues apparently, and is not willing to pay unless she likes us, which can be afforded for 200 gold. That's the art of the deal. Then we go and meet with the Telvanni. He's one of dozens of quote rogue unquote Telvanni living out on the frontier doing their own thing. I put quotes around rogue because honestly, taking a place and making it your own is the Telvanni way. Nothing roguish about that. He doesn't want to join the Mages Guild, complaining about how Outlanders are ruining Morrowind, but naturally this means he can be bought for 200 gold. Morrowind's quests leave a lot to be desired in terms of convincing people through dialogue. You may have noticed that in most dialogues, there aren't often conversation options.
And when there are, they tend to exist in a binary. The concept of dialogue in Morrowind having multiple options is actually fairly alien for the series. When I discuss options for quests, it tends to be in what you can do to complete it through gameplay to get different endings that have minor knock-on effects, but actual dialogue tends to be rather lacking in these choices. Morrowind's text-based dialogue seems like the perfect place to do an in-depth conversation system, yet it doesn't happen. Why? Well, in part this has to do with the way quest scripting works. The appropriate responses given to dialogue prompts is determined by a quest stage variable. However, go on many quest pages on the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, and you'll see full bug sections that are consequences of what happens if you do something slightly wrong affecting journal stages. Now, I never ran into the issue of bugging out the journal stages. I also never ran into a situation where I needed to use console commands to progress a quest, which is fortunate since I didn't have access to a console to do so. But I can speak from experience outside of this review series that it does happen. The journal stage system was new in Morrowind and at its most primordial. Bethesda also seemed more concerned with filling out all the content than doing the work necessary to take full advantage of the system they had created. Oblivion would have been the opportunity to expand on the text-based dialogue system, providing a wide swath of potential dialogue options for players and responses. Since it's text-only, you don't need voice actors. But instead, the decision was made to scrap the dialogue system and hire voice actors. Bethesda has stuck with the same engine, and that means the same journal stage system, although they're called quest stages now since the journal got peeled back. Even Fallout 76, which I haven't played, utilizes the system. And yet its advantage of potentially providing alternate paths for quests has been used sparingly by Bethesda. If you want a full demonstration of its potential, just look at a random Fallout New Vegas quest. You can see alternate paths, endings, and rewards tied all in there, and most New Vegas dialogues are full of optional paths despite being voice acted. Bethesda, even with the time and grace provided to them to create Skyrim, still couldn't muster the effort to improve its dialogue system and quest staging to provide options beyond, yes, I will do your quest, and no, but leave the door open so I can come back and do your quest at a later time. Anyways, I happened to grab a copy of the Chronicles of Newshleft while I was convincing that Tilvani to join the Mages Guild, and so I started doing more tasks for Edwina since she seemed the most reasonable of the options. She has me FedEx a potion over to Skink and Tree's Shade at the Wolverine Hall, introducing another quest giver who teases at orders once I finish this quest. Edwina now wants me to steal a book called Kymar Van Midium, and we might have to cast magic to do it. Just kidding, we're given a scroll with the necessary effect on it. Bethesda, if you keep holding my hand, I'm gonna start to think you like me. This is where I go off on a tangent because Bethesda just hates the idea of magic-themed questlines requiring players actually cast magic they've learned beforehand, but I just went on a huge tangent already and I'll let it slide for now. So we go to the Vivek Guild Hall, sneak into a closet and steal the book. Don't worry, we'll return it later. But before we do that, we need to deal with the situation developing up in Margan. Apparently there's a disturbance at Hulin's hut. Sure enough, we find the place trashed and a scamp's running loose. An apprentice to Hulin apparently summoned it to prove his worth, but the scamp was only pretending to be under his control and stole his clothes and locked him in the basement. I kinda like this quest. Edwina is less than thrilled that her time was wasted on something like that. Now we return the book, which I just give to its owner, and she's surprised at its return, and that's that. Now we need to source a Dwemer tube from a place called Arkinthunsterdums. She doesn't actually need any specific tube, just a tube will do. So while we're on the way up to the ruin, let's talk about the Xbox. The Xbox had a severe effect on the difficulty of the game. Turns out playing the game at a low frame rate compromises the experience. Who knew? The biggest culprit of deaths would be when I would press a button, only to not get a response because the button pressed happened to correspond with a stutter, so the input would be lost and my character would just impotently stand there and take their beating. Another offender is weapon and magic stancing. Those unaware may be used to the idea of pressing a button to draw a weapon. Well, in Morrowind you have a separate stance for casting magic. This stance was removed in Oblivion, and I have a suspicion about why that was. See, among the inputs that can be lost in stutters are the transitions from your normal stance to magic stance, or to your weapon, or to switch between them both. I got frustrated more than a couple times when my character would refuse to switch stances. This would have been a standard experience on the Xbox, since it didn't fare much better than the 360 when running the game. It's not much of a secret that the Xbox copy of Morrowind served as a testing ground for ideas for Bethesda. The new multi-panel UI being adapted into Oblivion, for example, before being reverse ported onto PC players, much to our chagrin. The lack of response simply made Magic Stance too much of a hassle to keep in the game, hence the new cast button that allowed you to use magic at any time. I actually prefer Skyrim's system of having 2 independent hands, even if the magic tangent removed. So what are some other quirks of the Xbox? Well, the AI stopping and taking a think happened quite a bit. It seemed the game prioritized keeping itself running over the AI pathing. However, this wasn't consistent. If the AI knew what it was trying to do and then the game stuttered, the AI would continue on its collision course independent of my ability to respond, button presses being ignored, and of course, since this is being played suboptimally on a controller, this ended in a fair few deaths that wouldn't have happened if I was playing with a keyboard and mouse. I do this for love. Ranged combat in particular was quite difficult. At a high resolution, it's easy to spot enemies from the environment, but squeeze that resolution in, knock it down a few hundred pixels, sprinkle on some aliasing and bad lighting, and all of a sudden target acquisition in Morrowind is quite difficult. And aiming with a controller, I mean, my god, I don't want to harp on the weaknesses of controllers this much, but trying to aim with some measure of precision was a nightmare. Especially since the projectile trajectories and collision models were built with the idea of being used with a mouse first. Moreover, playing with a dominant strategy is encouraged because of the loading screens. Loading is near instantaneous on a modern PC, as is expected, but on the Xbox I spent probably hours of my life just waiting. Optimally, it was a good time to take notes, but sometimes when I was just forced to reload because I kept dying on difficult fights, it was less than appreciated. So playing in unorthodox ways was discouraged. Let me give you an example. Ever notice how every Skyrim playthrough you see ends up being stealth archery at some point? Dominant strategy. The upsides of the strategy always present themselves as an option should the downsides of the situation impede progress. For Morrowind, the dominant strategy is to use enchanted items with powerful on-touch effects to nuke enemies to death, and then run back and forth timing the enemy's attacks and swinging in between rounds. As long as I had room to maneuver in Morrowind, victory was guaranteed. The fun then came from trying to play in new or interesting ways, trying unconventional magicka effects, or summoning, and then I die for the 5th time and I say, looks like I'll have to get a little bit serious. Overall, playing on the Xbox made me hate this game, and at the same time, appreciate what exactly about Morrowind would cause me to waste so much time analyzing it. To me, it's the ultimate testament of respect, as the thoughts say. If you can't handle her at your worst, you don't deserve her at her best. Even if sometimes her best is also her worst. Now that we've got the tube, we're tasked with checking in on a Dwemer Ruin expedition. This is, naturally, in the middle of Molagmer. Luckily, Edwina gave us a couple handy intervention amulets to facilitate the travel. Turns out the site's guide has gone missing deeper inside the ruin, and worst of all, he had to report Edwina once. Some investigation reveals the test of pattern. There are 3 lights, each with a corresponding lever. 2 lights are broken, 1 light is not. Which lever is the correct one to pull? Well, don't worry, it's the lever that is across the room from the hidden wall, as shown on the minimap. Yeah, the Dunmer guide is dead, but he did manage to find a book before dying. The Mages Guild rep isn't too bothered by his death, and we take the report to Edwina, who says the book might be useful if we knew somebody who can speak Alt-Maris. Our next task is to acquire some Dwemer Scarab plans from the ruin of Musleft, up in Sheogorath. And this is a little high level, as evidenced by the fact that all the orcs can one-shot me. I won this fight, eventually, by using a paralyze spell to freeze the orc, then cast a spell that had a 50% chance of working to nuke him to death. This took quite a few attempts, and involved a trip back to make the nuke spell. Now I have the plans, but in for a penny and for a pound, surely there's something valuable here. Well, there's more orcs. Luckily I found a use for the lock spell. Why do you want a spell that locks doors and creates future hassle? Because NPCs can't unlock them, and can be hit through them. A tactic I discovered early on was the locked door tactic. The enemy's AI pathfinding would lead it through doorways, but can only account for obstacles like doors by opening and traveling through them. To the AI, it should be paradoxical that they can detect someone through a locked door, as if the door is locked, then the player can't have come in the room. That's obviously not how it actually works, but the point is, from a design perspective, what I'm doing only works thanks to an exploitation, or rather a clever use of game mechanics. The only other thing you can use lock for is if you care to level your security up, and you really shouldn't do that. However, the other half of this is a ranged spell with an area effect. I always felt it was a shame what happened to spellmaking in the later games. In Oblivion, it got relegated to a high-level reward for Mages Guild members, or DLC, while in Skyrim it was cut entirely. Using the Spellmaker allowed me to make a fire spell that was perfect for hitting through locked doors, maxing out the area and setting it to low damage, high duration, making it magicka efficient as well. Then I just nuke the door until I stopped hearing footsteps on the other side. It's a beautifully stupid tactic, but hey, it works. I like to imagine I'm just heating the room up until the people inside burn to death, which is brutal, but hey, shouldn't have been the one shotting me. In addition to the Scarab plans, I find a book named The Egg of Time. Edwina thanks us for the plans and recommends we speak with Hasfet Antabulus in Balmora about the book. He says the book is written in Aldmeris, which is a dead language, so we should take the book to one of the older Telvanni, but he doesn't have a recommendation who. Edwina says the miners in the Nisus egg mine found a Dwemer ruin in the mine, and she asks us to find anything that's down there. Specifically, plans. I have to bribe the door guard for the key, and another guard lower in the mine threatens to kill me if I don't leave. So I leave, in the direction of the ruin. It still counts. Near the entrance, I found some Dwemer airship plans, as well as a book named Divine Metaphysics. Leaving the mine, I hear some ruins that Nisus has a rogue Telvanni wizard living in town, so I pay him a visit. His name is Balados Demnavani, and sure enough, he can read Aldmeris. The Hanging Gardens was written in both Aldmeris and Dwemer, so it's able to be used to translate the other two books. The Egg of Time is a refutation of a theory from the time of Resdain and Nerevar. The theory said that using the power of the Heart of Lorkhan carried more risk than reward, and the Egg of Time figured that the reward was worth the risks. Divine Metaphysics is about how the Dwemer tried to make a new god using Kagranak's tools, and using sacred tones on Lorkhan's heart. So, extrapolating meaning from these two books, we can conclude that the Dwemer tried to make a new god using Lorkhan's heart, that the great risk that was warned about came true, and then the Dwemer disappeared. Thus, having discovered both the plans to a functioning airship, as well as solving the mystery of the spontaneous extinction of the Dwemer, we will return for our rewards. Edwina has none. She's disappointed because she wanted the plans to build a robot, not an airship. Trebonius, the Archmage, also has no reward, taken aback that someone had actually managed to complete one of his missions, let alone a mission that entailed solving a centuries if not millennia old mystery. You do get some reputation, so more people know your name, but scholarly work itself pays very little. Despite this, the Mystery of the Dwarves is one of my favorite quests. The fact that it starts off giving you zero information to use, but is perfectly solvable just by paying attention while doing other quests is just fantastic. So where do we go from here? Well, one rank requires we pay our dues, so that's a couple hundred gold gone. You'll also need a wizard staff to reach the rank of wizard, so we can either pay 5,000 gold we don't have, or we can, ask. Yeah, ask a former guild member for one, who lives in a cave called Sud in Sheogored. I don't think she'll let us ask. Once we got the staff, we can get promoted. Oh, but hold those horses because we have something big to talk about. Training. One of my favorite aspects about Morrowind is that factions require you have the necessary skills to properly fill your rank. Every faction has attributes and skills they prefer. Now, assuming you're being a logical person and playing to the specialization of the faction, these are reasonable skill requirements. However, this is an instance where the game is just twisting that knife into me, and that is due to my format. Had I played the one character doing all the factions, I'd have been alright. It'd have been fine. It'd have had 2 contractions when I should not have been using any. Point is, I have 7 characters, and for 6 of them, the same thing happened at least once. They outquested the requirements. Now, if you play this game like a goddamn normal person, you're doing stuff like adventuring, freelance quest work, even working for other factions. That's what a reasonable person who isn't playing faction by faction in order to make a video series does. We have enough faction reputation to complete the final quest and become the Archmage, but we're severely underleveled. I need to gain 30 levels in a single skill to reach the requirements. This happened to Steals Your Wallet, and to a minor extent Mace as well. Mace was actually very close to the necessary requirements in his blunt weapon ability, and that's because fighter skills tend to level really well compared to stealth and magic skills. So in order to progress, I need to use a trainer. Trainers are a bit different from the later games. Later games put stipulations that you can only train 5 times per level. Morrowind has no such requirement. Cash provided, you can train from level 1 to max level, whatever that should be for your character, at trainers. But it isn't that easy. Like the later games, the trainers themselves have their own skill levels, corresponding to their lore level of mastery. You need these master trainers because only they can train you past skill level 70. Most skills, and mind should be paid to the word most skills have master trainers. Some don't appear. Some do appear but don't offer training, and some just don't have trainers. Of the ones who do exist and do work, only about 2/3 of them are mentioned anywhere. The rest have to be found. Hell, some of them may only be mentioned. One is hidden in a locked room. Another is hostile and attacks on sight, having to be calmed. 2 require a high rank in a specific faction. So not only are their trainers rare people, but training costs money, and high-level training costs lots of it. I'll talk about making money in part 4 when I discuss House Halau. Just bear in mind that large stopping point in every playthrough, besides my final main quest playthrough, was stopping and setting aside time to farm money and skills in order to meet the requirements to level up. Again, this doesn't normally happen unless you're laser focused on completing factions as fast as possible with new characters. So once I finally reach destruction level 80, Edwina says that I should talk with the Archmage Trebonius about stepping down, as I'm clearly more committed to scholarship than he is. I ask him, and he accuses me of lusting after his position, and demands we settle this via duel to the death in arena. And it's a pretty cool duel. Turns out he had an artifact called the Necromancer's Amulet that made him such a powerful wizard. Edwina said he was a strong battle mage, but he hardly met the conditions of battle mage. Anyways, the Mages Guild, scholarly institution, settles its management disputes via trial by combat, and I am now the Archmage. I'm not sure if I'm going to get a letter in the mail from Mikado telling me I'm being replaced. Guess we'll find out in part 5. Oh, but watch part 4 when it comes out. The Imperial Guilds of Morrowind are the bridge between the tutorial and the broader content of Morrowind, since Caius pretty much flat out tells you to go join one, which is why it is important to pay attention to the starter quests, since this is likely to be the first impressions of everyone who played Morrowind past the first mud crab. The intrigue of the Thieves Guild line, the fun stuff like the Pudet egg mine and the golden eggs, or accidentally running into a powerful vampire in the Fighters Guild, and the mystery of the dwarves quest requiring a bit of astute problem solving or internet research to figure out. Despite how hard I may have gone on these guilds, they actually are pretty good. But when the Thieves Guild throws you into the deep end of crime, the Fighters Guild starts pitting you in unfair fights, and the Mages Guild engages in bureaucratic busy work, it colors people's impressions of the factions. One thing to mention, because of the non-linear approach to faction quests in Morrowind, my experience of the guilds is slightly different than what yours can be. I mentioned Skink and Tree's Shade, but looking back I never went and did his quests, or that many of Rannis Athrith's quests either. This non-linearity is what I love about Morrowind, and at the same time, is the biggest risk in terms of personal enjoyment, which is probably one of the big reasons Oblivion Onward focused on linear quest lines leading players by the nose into controlled experiences. The Imperial Guilds in Morrowind are a strange thing. Between the Fighters and Thieves Guild war and the rather straightforward if simple Mages Guild, you hit the 3 archetypes of role-playing games. In the next part, we'll be discussing the Great Houses. You see those same 3 archetypes, but a lot more political intrigue. I think if love was shown to any of the factions, it was the Great Houses. Still, the guilds serve as a great starting point for any character, especially for players new to Morrowind.